The train screeched, and Hannah Miller's heart sank. Through the dirty window, she saw him. Thomas Grayson, the rancher who paid for a bride he'd never met. He was tall, weathered, and did not smile as he scanned the platform. In less than a minute, he would learn the truth. She was not the woman he chose. She was the wrong sister. Before this story of the Montana Territory unfolds, I hope you'll stay to the end. If you enjoy it, please give it a like and comment with your city. Now back to 1877. The train was taking her across an endless golden prairie under a big blue sky. Hannah, at 26 years old, was plain, with her brown hair pulled back tight. She was traveling on a ticket bearing the name of her younger, prettier sister, Rose. The letters in the photograph the rancher had were all of Rose. But Rose was not on this train. Rose had married a banker's son just 3 weeks ago, leaving Hannah with a bride contract for a stranger in a land she only knew from newspapers. The train whistle blew as they neared Clearwater Station, and Hannah's stomach turned to knots. How could she explain? The truth was simple and desperate. Her father had already spent the $200 Thomas sent. That money saved their farm, paid the doctor who kept her mother alive, and bought seed for the next crop. There was no paying it back. Hannah would have to convince him to let her work off the debt. The train stopped with a hiss of steam. Through the window, Clearwater looked like a few tired buildings against a backdrop of distant, rugged mountains. On the platform stood a dozen dusty men, and one who stood alone. That had to be Thomas Grayson. She knew it was him by the way he waited, like a man who did not expect good things to happen. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face tanned by sun and wind. His dark brown hair was a little long for the style back east, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a startling blue-green, and they held no warmth at all. As his gaze swept over the passengers, Hannah's hands began to shake. She was a fraud among honest people. She forced her feet to move and stepped out into the hot, dry Montana air. The wooden platform creaked under her boots. Thomas moved through the small crowd, his eyes still searching for the girl in the photograph. When he looked at Hannah's plain face, he would know instantly. His eyes passed over her, then snapped back. Thomas Grayson just stared for a long moment before walking straight toward her. He stopped a few feet away, and she saw his face up close. It was hard, shaped by work, in a loneliness so deep it seemed set in his bones. His gaze moved over her features, searching for her sister's beauty, and finding none of it. "You are not her," he said. His voice was low and rough. "No," Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady. "I am not. My name is Hannah Miller. I am Rose's older sister." "Where is Rose?" "She married another man 3 weeks ago." A flicker of something that was not quite anger crossed his face. "So you came to collect the money anyway?" "The money is gone," Hannah said, meeting his hard stare. "My father used it to save our farm and buy medicine for my mother. I cannot pay you back, but I can work. I can cook, clean, and I know my way around a farm. Let me work to pay off the debt. You do not have to marry me." Thomas's jaw grew tight as the few remaining people on the platform watched them. "I did not send for hired help," he said flatly. "I sent for a wife." "I understand that, and I am sorry, but I am asking for a chance. Give me 3 months to work off this debt." "And then what?" he asked. "There is no work for a single woman here, except in the saloon." Heat rose in Hannah's face, but she stood her ground. "Then I suppose you had better accept my offer, because I am not leaving until this debt is settled." They stood in a silent battle of wills. He was weighing his options, and none of them were good. Finally, with a sharp, frustrated motion, Thomas picked up her bag. 3 months, he said. "You will sleep in the spare room, and you will earn your keep. Stay out of my way. When the 3 months are over, you leave. Those are my terms." "Agreed," Hannah said, relief washing over her. "The wagon is this way," he said, turning and walking away without another word. Hannah hurried to follow. "Model." She felt the whispers trailing after her like a shadow. Well, she'd gone and made a scene. In a town this small, the news would spread faster than a prairie fire. Thomas Grayson's mail-order bride was the wrong woman. But she'd bought herself 3 months. 3 months to prove she was worth her salt. The wagon was plain and weathered, pulled by 2 sturdy horses that looked as tough as their owner. He tossed her bag in the back without a word. He wasn't going to help her up. Fair enough. She hiked up her skirts and pulled herself onto the seat. Thomas swung up beside her and clicked the reins. They rode out of town without a sound. After a mile, he finally spoke. The ranch is about 7 miles west. His voice was flat. He said the Broken Creek Ranch was 800 acres, running 200 head of cattle. The main house needed work. How long you been alone? She asked softly. 5 years. My mother was with me till she passed on 2 winters back. I'm sorry. Don't be, it was her time. Silence again. The wagon creaked along the bumpy road with nothing but grass and a few cottonwood trees for miles. So why'd you do it? Thomas asked suddenly. Why come here instead of just sending word? Hannah took a deep breath. No sense in lying. The money saved my mother's life. My sister found a chance at real happiness, and I couldn't take that from her. And, she added, her voice quiet, I had nothing left. At 26, I was too old and too plain. This disaster is still a better chance than what I had back in Philadelphia. His hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing. They passed a stone marker that read Broken Creek, 3 miles. The land started to roll a bit, and a clear creek appeared on their right. That's the north boundary, Thomas said, nodding toward it. The cattle stay in the valley till winter. They crested a small hill, and she saw the house. A 2-story place of weathered wood with a porch running along the front. It was bigger than she'd figured, but it looked neglected. The porch sagged, and a few shutters hung crooked. The yard was just packed dirt. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop. We get supplies from town once a month. You stay here otherwise. There's drifters sometimes. If you see a stranger, you get inside and you bar the door. Understand? Understood. He hopped down and grabbed her bag. She climbed down on her own. Up close, she could see the peeling paint and cracked windows. I'll show you inside. You can take the spare room. It was my mother's. The front room made her heart sink. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, with mismatched furniture scarred from years of hard use. Kitchen's through there, Thomas pointed. My room's down here. Yours is upstairs. The stairs creaked under their feet. The spare room was small and dusty, with just a bed, a dresser, and one window looking out at the mountains. He set her bag on the bed. Supper is at 6. Nothing fancy. I'll leave you to settle in. He paused at the door. Look, I know this ain't what either of us wanted, but you're here now, and I gave my word for 3 months. I'll keep it. Just stay out of my way and don't make me regret this. Then he was gone. Hannah stood alone in the quiet, dusty room. For 3 months, this was her home. She had at least 3 months to prove her worth, maybe longer. After quickly unpacking her few belongings, she went downstairs to face the kitchen. It was a complete disaster. Dishes were piled high in a basin. The stove was caked with old grime, and the whole room just smelled of neglect. Without a second thought, Hannah found an old apron, tied it around her waist, and started the long work of bringing order back to the chaos. The stew will be ready in about 20 minutes, she said as he appeared. Thomas just stood in the doorway, completely stunned by the change. He ran a hand over a clean counter as if he did not quite believe it was real. They ate their meal in a heavy silence. The only sound was the clink of their spoons against the bowls. He took a second helping, which Hannah counted as a small victory. Afterward, he simply told her not to expect to cook him breakfast. His tone made it clear there was no room to argue. The silence of the ranch was immense, so different from the city. Lying in bed, her body aching from work, she could not shake one thought. Thomas had paid for her beautiful sister, Rose. Instead, he got her, the plain, practical mistake. But she had 90 days, just 3 months, to prove that sometimes a mistake is exactly what a person needs. The next morning, she woke to golden sunlight. Thomas was already gone, but he had left bread and warm coffee on the stove. While sipping her coffee, she looked out at the sprawling ranch. It was beautiful in a rugged, unforgiving way, much like Thomas himself. She spent the whole morning finishing what she had started, scrubbing away months of dust and neglect until the main floor was clean. As she was scrubbing the floor, the front door opened. A weathered man in his 50s stood there holding his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Frank Delacroix, the foreman. I heard there was a new lady on the property." Hannah stood up. "Hannah Miller. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Delacroix." He just smiled. "Frank is fine, ma'am." "Boss said you were a surprise," Frank said with a kind smile. I'm here for 3 months to clear a debt, Hannah stated plainly. Frank nodded, his weathered face showing approval. This place needs you. The boss, he's been lost for a long while. He assured her the hands would treat her with respect. Your coming here might be the best mistake this ranch has ever seen, he added. Maybe you can gentle him. And so Hannah worked from dawn to dusk, bringing life back to the ranch. But Thomas remained a ghost, always avoiding her. Though Thomas ate his meals in silence, Hannah saw small signs of change. Tools were put away, muddy boots were left outside. On the fourth day, she took a gamble and decided to tackle his bedroom. The chaos inside told her this was a man who had simply given up. For 2 hours, she worked tirelessly. Dust vanished, clothes were folded, and scattered ranch records became neat piles. She even added a vase of wildflowers. Just as she finished, she heard his heavy boots stop right outside the door. He was home. He stood in the doorway, stunned. I'm sorry, Hannah said quickly. I just organized things. I did not read anything. Thomas looked at her, and his eyes held something other than anger. It looked like confusion, or maybe pain. I did not ask you to do this, he said, his voice low. This room is off limits. He looked back at the clean room, then whispered, Thank you, before shutting the door. Later at supper, Thomas broke the silence. I'm taking cattle to market. You should come to town for supplies. He added gruffly, People will talk less if they see you are actually working. Hannah simply nodded. It was a start. The week was filled with repairs, and Hannah earned the quiet respect of the ranch hands. They were drawn to her kitchen window by the smell of real food. On market day, she dressed in her best patched dress and packed a lunch. The 2-hour ride to town was different. Thomas actually talked, explaining the business of the ranch. He spoke of cattle prices and buyers, and Hannah listened carefully. In the bustling town of Clearwater, Thomas handled his business while Hannah stood by the wagon. She felt the stares and heard the whispers about being the wrong bride, but she held her head high. After the cattle were sold, Thomas took her to the general store. Get what you need, he said. Hannah bought staples and seeds for a garden, ignoring the storekeeper's curious stare. As they loaded the wagon, a sharp voice called out, Thomas Grayson, I heard you finally got a bride. A fashionable woman, Mrs. Winters, approached with her friends. Her smile never reached her eyes. This is Hannah Miller, Thomas said, his body tense. Well, Mrs. Winters said, looking Hannah up and down with scorn, we were all so curious. Now I see. How practical. Hannah felt the woman's insult like a slap. Thomas's voice was flat when he said, If you will excuse us, we need to get back. But the woman was not finished, her words dripping with deliberate cruelty. Hannah forced a smile. My sister is very happy, and this arrangement suits everyone. As they turned to leave, the woman's voice followed them. I suppose when you are past marriageable age, you take what opportunities you can get. They rode out of town in a tense silence. After a mile, Thomas finally said, Do not let them bother you. Hannah's voice was steady. She was speaking the truth. These are facts, not insults. Thomas said nothing more, but his hands were clenched tight on the reins. A package was sitting on the clean kitchen table. Inside was a bolt of fabric, a soft green cloth, much nicer than anything from the town store. There was no note. It was just a quiet act of kindness from a man who seemed to have forgotten how. She touched the fabric, a tightness in her throat. She had come here just to work off a debt and survive. She never expected to start caring what Thomas Grayson thought of her. She sure hadn't counted on looking at his hard, lonely face and wondering what it would take to make him smile. For the next 3 nights, she stitched that green fabric by lamplight. When the dress was finished, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her from the mirror. Hannah knew the dress made her gray eyes shine. For a moment, she let herself feel like the kind of woman Thomas Grayson might have chosen. Then, remembering the town gossip, she tied her hair back and went to make breakfast. Thomas was already there, which was strange. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. When he saw her, his eyes noticed the dress, but his face showed nothing. Morning, he said flatly. I'll have breakfast on the table in 20 minutes, she replied. No need, Sam, he said, setting his cup down. We need to talk. He explained that the big fall roundup was starting next week. It meant long, hard days for him and the ranch hands. Hannah waited, cracking eggs into a bowl. She knew there was more. I planned on sending you to town for a week or two, he said. It isn't proper for you to be here alone with us while we're so busy. Her hand stopped. You're sending me away? And who will cook for you all? Who will keep this house running and order supplies when you are working 18-hour days? Thomas's jaw set. We will manage. You will eat cold food from a can and work yourselves into the ground. She shot back. I came here to work, Thomas. You cannot just set me aside when it is not convenient. This is not about convenience. It is about what is proper. She almost laughed at that. Proper? I am the woman who showed up as the wrong bride. The whole town, thanks to Mrs. Winters, knows I am an old maid working off my sister's debt. What proper reputation do I have left to protect? The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. I do not think you are desperate, he said softly, and I never called you a mistake. She turned back to the eggs, mixing them hard. Tell me about the roundup. What needs doing? She demanded. If you send me to town, Mrs. Winters will have 2 weeks to tell everyone I am too useless to even keep around during busy season. Do you want to prove her right? The silence was heavy. Finally, Thomas pulled out a chair. The work is hard, he said. We need coffee by 4 in the morning, hot meals at night, and food packed for the day. We also need medical supplies ready for injuries. Hannah poured the eggs onto the hot skillet. I can do all of that. You will have to manage the horses too. Feed them, check for injuries. Can you do that? I grew up on a farm, she said simply. I have handled horses since I was 10. He paused. Stay out of the branding pens. The cattle get wild, and I will not have you getting hurt. Agreed, son, she said, and wear sensible clothes. No skirts to get caught on a fence. Thomas, she said, turning with the spatula. I am not a fool. I know what I can and cannot do. I can help you if you will let me. The real question is, do you trust me enough to even trip a she? He studied her face and she held his gaze. This was the real test. This was about whether he saw her as a partner or just a burden. At last, he gave a single sharp nod. All right, you stay, but you follow my rules. No arguments. No arguments, Hannah promised, relief washing over her. Now sit down before your breakfast gets cold. A small smile almost touched his lips. She served him the eggs, and he ate like a man who had forgotten that food could be a pleasure. When he finished, he took his own plate to the sink. Good breakfast, he said. Then he walked out, leaving Hannah in the morning light, feeling like she had just won a very important battle. She spent the next week preparing like a general. She took inventory of medical supplies, baked bread that would last, and packed dried goods. She mended work shirts and even made a muscle rub from a recipe of Thomas's mother's she found. Frank, the old ranch hand, found her in the barn checking the saddles. Does the boss know you are out here? He asked with a smile. He told me to manage the horses. That includes the gear, she said, pointing to a cracked strap. This needs to be replaced. Frank's smile faded. You sure you want to stay for this, ma'am? The boss gets focused. He has no patience for mistakes during roundup. Then I will not make any, Hannah said, meeting his gaze. Frank, I need him to see I am not just a burden he got stuck with. Is that how you think he sees you? I think, she said carefully, that he does not know how to see me at all. If I can prove myself now when things are hard, maybe when my 3 months are up, he will let me stay. Frank looked at her thoughtfully. You want to stay on? Hannah had been wondering the same thing. She had come here just to survive, to pay a debt, but she had grown to care for the wide-open land and the honest work. She even liked seeing Thomas's tired face relax when he came in for a hot meal. It was not a fairy tale romance, but it was real. Truth is, I've got nowhere else to go, she finally admitted. And this place, it needs someone. Thomas works himself into the ground, and this house is crying out for a little care. Frank's expression softened. Mrs. Grayson used to say the same thing. She tried to make it a warm home, but the old boss was a hard man. After he passed and Thomas took over, she got sick. Worried about leaving him alone, said he needed a partner, not just hired help. He smiled a sad smile. She knew he was sending for a bride, made him promise. She would have liked you. You've got the same look she had when she decided something needed fixin'. Hannah felt a lump form in her throat. I'll tell the boys you're in charge of the horses and supplies, Frank said, tipping his hat. They give you trouble, they answer to me. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me yet. Wait till you've survived a roundup. Roundup began before the sun, with just a hint of gray in the sky. Hannah had coffee and a heavy breakfast ready at 4 a.m., just as she'd promised. The men ate fast, the tension thick in the room. This was dangerous work. A man could get trampled or gored in a heartbeat. We'll work the north section first, Thomas said, finishing his coffee. Expect us back around the 2. If we're not here by 3, ride out to the Box Canyon. He paused at the door. Keep that rifle in the kitchen handy. Safety is on, but it is loaded. Anyone you do not know comes knocking, you bar that door. Then they were gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the dark. The house fell quiet. Hannah rolled up her sleeves and started her day. She found them in a whirlwind of organized chaos. Dust, smoke, and the smell of cattle hung heavy in the air. Thomas was on his horse, cutting animals from the herd with an expert's eye. Frank oversaw the branding. Thomas rode over to meet her, his shirt plastered with sweat, his face streaked with dust. "Food is here," Hannah called out. "Good," he said, swinging down from his horse. He looked stiff after hours in the saddle. "Any trouble at the house?" "None at all." He nodded, turning back to the herd, but then stopped. "This is good, you riding out. Saved us an hour." Coming from Thomas Grayson, it was high praise. That evening, the men came in filthy and exhausted. She had hot water for washing and a hot meal on the table. They ate in near silence. When Thomas went back for a third helping, Frank caught Hannah's eye and gave her a slight wink. His hand rested on her shoulder for just a second, but she felt its warmth right through her dress. The days ran together in a blur of chores from dawn till dusk. On the 4th day, a spooked horse kicked Jimmy. He stumbled in, pale and clutching his ribs, trying to hide the pain. Hannah made him sit, her hands checking him over gently. "Nothing's broken," she announced, "but you're bruised up something fierce. You need to rest." From the doorway, Thomas's voice left no room for argument. "You heard her. You'll rest." Hannah fixed a poultice for Jimmy's ribs and sent him to the bunkhouse. Later, she brought him soup. "You didn't have to," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "We're just ranch hands." Hannah shook her head. "You're a person who works hard. That means you deserve care when you're hurt." Word got around. The next day, the men treated her with a newfound respect. On the 6th day, trouble arrived. 3 steers had busted through a fence and vanished into the rough country. Thomas stared at the gap, pure frustration on his face. "We can't afford to lose them, but we're too far behind to track them." Hannah spoke up. "I'll go." Every man there turned to stare. "Absolutely not," Thomas said flatly. "That country's no joke. You could get lost, and you can't handle 3 steers by yourself." "I won't handle them," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'll just find them, mark their spot, and come back. I'm a good tracker, Thomas, and you need every hand you've got right here." He hesitated. "It's dangerous. So as you wasting time looking for me, I'll take the rifle and leave a clear trail. If I'm not back by sundown, you'll know right where to look." She saw the fight in his eyes, the practical need against his instinct to protect. "Anna, trust me," she said softly. "Please." That one word settled it. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Be back by sunset." Not 1 minute later. "You see any trouble, you ride straight back. Those cattle aren't worth it." She left on a steady mare named Daisy, her rifle in its holster. The steer's trail was plain to see at first, leading west into the hills. Hannah rode carefully, marking her own path with stacks of stones so anyone could follow. By mid-afternoon, she found them grazing peacefully in a little valley. She scouted the area, then built a clear marker on the ridge overlooking them. With that done, she turned Daisy for home. The sun was touching the mountains when the ranch appeared. Thomas was already pacing by the barn. The moment he saw her, he was in his saddle and riding hard to meet her. He pulled up beside her, his voice tight. "You find them?" "A small valley about 3 miles west. I marked it," she said, handing him a rough map she had drawn. "They're calm, not hurt." Thomas barely glanced at the map. His eyes were on her, taking in the dust on her clothes and the weariness on her face. "You did good," he said. Just those 3 words, but the respect in his voice felt like a huge victory. They rode the rest of the way in a comfortable silence. At the barn, Frank, one of the older hands, was waiting. "Heard you tracked him clean, ma'am. That's fine work. The boss's mother could track like that." Thomas dismounted and then reached up to help Hannah down. His hands were steady on her waist, and for a moment they stood close. She saw the lines around his blue-green eyes and caught the scent of leather and dust. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement, a thank you. "Thanks for taking the risk," he said quietly, "and for coming back safe." "Always," she replied with a small smile. 2 days later, the roundup was finished. That night, Hannah cooked a big celebration dinner. For the first time, the five of them gathered around the kitchen table, and the ranch house finally felt like a home. The men told stories and laughed, and even Thomas seemed to relax. When the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse, Thomas stayed to help her clean up. They worked without speaking, a comfortable rhythm between them. "You were right," he said, breaking the silence, "about staying on. We couldn't have done it without you." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "Your 3 months are about half over. You've more than worked off what you owed. If you wanted to leave, I wouldn't stop you." Hannah paused, her hand still. She looked at him, wondering if he was asking her to leave or giving her a reason to stay. "That debt is paid, Hannah," Thomas said, his voice steady. "You came here because you had to. If you stay now, it has to be your choice." Hannah put down her cleaning cloth. This was the moment for honesty. "I am 26 and plain-spoken," she said. "I have no family waiting for me. But here I feel useful. I feel like this place needs me, like I belong in a way I never have before." Thomas was quiet for a long time. "It is not foolish," he said finally. "You do belong here. You have made this house feel like it did when my mother was alive." He moved a little closer. "But you should know, people will talk. Mrs. Winters will see to that. It will get ugly. It is already ugly. It will get worse," he said, his eyes serious. "I can offer you a home, but not respectability. Unless," he hesitated, "unless we were to get married." The words sounded rough. "Make it legal. Give you my name. It would stop the gossip for good." Hannah's heart pounded. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am offering a practical solution," Thomas said, his voice carefully flat. "This would not have to be a real marriage, just a legal arrangement. You would have your own room and my protection." It should have stung, but it did not. She understood. Thomas Grayson did not know how to offer softness, but he knew how to offer safety. "And what would you get out of it?" she asked softly. His guard dropped for just a second, and she saw it plain as day, a loneliness so deep it ached. "I would get a partner," he said, his voice simple but full of meaning. "Someone who understands this life, someone willing to build something right here alongside me. Maybe it was something better, built on respect." "I am thinking about it," she said. That night, Thomas found her in the kitchen after everyone else was asleep. "When your 3 months are done," he started, his voice rough, "you could stay on. As my wife." Hannah stared at him, completely stunned. He explained it would be a partnership. He needed someone to help run the ranch, someone he could trust. He was not offering grand romance, but a home, a purpose, and his respect. It was the last thing she ever expected. "Can I have time to think about it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Take all the time you need," he said, and left her alone. She sat by her window all night, watching the stars. She had spent her life just enduring, just getting by. Now she had a choice. This hard, quiet man had offered her a real home, a partnership. As the sun came up, Hannah knew her answer. She found Thomas in the barn. He was already working, his hands moving with steady purpose. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes told her he was waiting. "I have an answer for you," Hannah said, stepping into the scent of hay and leather. Hannah felt small in the big barn, but her voice was steady. She faced Thomas, who had paused his work with a leather bridle. She said, "I will accept your offer to marry, but I have 2 conditions." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" She nodded. "First, this is my choice. I am choosing you and this ranch because it matters to me, not because I have nowhere else to go." He gave a slow nod. "Understood. And the second?" She stepped closer. "If this arrangement ever becomes more than just business, we have to be honest about it. No guessing games. If feelings change, we talk about it." A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face. "Agreed," he said, and held out his calloused hand. They shook on it, sealing a deal that felt bigger than any cattle sale. We will go to town tomorrow, Thomas said, his voice practical again. Get the license. Keep it simple. Hannah agreed. They decided to tell the ranch hands at supper so the men would hear it from them first. Then came the awkward part. About the sleeping arrangements, Thomas started. I will stay in my room. You will stay in yours, Hannah finished for him. If that changes, we will discuss it. And if that changes, we will discuss it like adults. Her voice was firm. Is there anything else? Thomas put the bridle down. Just one thing. This might not be a love match, but I will be faithful to you and our vows. I am a man of my word. Oh, the sincerity in his voice surprised her. I believe you, she said softly. And I will be faithful, too. They stood in the quiet of the barn, two practical people making a deal to build a life. That evening, they told Frank and the other hands at supper. After a moment of stunned silence, Frank's weathered face broke into a huge grin. Well, I will be, he boomed. Congratulations to you both. This is good news. Carlos nodded warmly. The ranch needs a lady. It needs both of you. Jimmy, the youngest, just blushed and mumbled something that sounded like congratulations. Later, Thomas walked Hannah to the stairs. The air between them felt different now, a little awkward. You sure about this? He asked, his voice low, quietly. Last chance, he was giving her an out. I am sure. Are you? Hannah asked, her own voice steady. He just nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. But sleep did not come easy. The next morning, the trip to town was silent. Thomas handled the wagon, and Hannah sat beside him in her best green dress, trying not to picture the look on Mrs. Winter's face. At the courthouse, the clerk barely batted an eye. Then it was on to a small church where a kind-eyed minister performed the service with simple grace. Frank stood as witness, solid and approving. There was no music and no flowers. Thomas spoke his vows clearly, promising to protect her. Hannah promised to stand by him. When the minister declared them man and wife, Thomas gave her a brief, proper kiss on the cheek. And just like that, in under 10 minutes, Hannah Miller was gone. In her place stood Hannah Grayson. As they left the church, Mrs. Winters stood on the street like a storm cloud. Her eyes took in everything, her mouth a flat line. Well, she said loudly, I see some congratulations are in order. How very convenient for you, Mrs. Grayson. That is my wife's name, Thomas said, his voice cold as ice. He offered Hannah his arm for the first time, and she took it, holding her head high as they walked past the woman and the gathering crowd of onlookers. Let them whisper. She was Miss Thomas Grayson now, and that was that. The ride home was quiet until Thomas finally spoke. I'm sorry about Mrs. Winters. She was always going to make things hard, Hannah replied. This way, at least, it is done. Practical, he said, the words sounding strange. Life as a married couple was not much different from before. They fell into the same routines. He worked the ranch, she ran the house, they were polite strangers sharing a name, sleeping in separate rooms. As the days grew shorter and cooler, Thomas started preparing for winter. That is when the first cow got sick. He found her standing alone, breathing hard. By the time Hannah saw her, 2 more were down. Looks like pneumonia, Frank said, his face grim. If it spreads, we could lose the herd. We would be ruined. Thomas knelt by the sick animal, the worry plain on his face. This ranch was his whole life. To lose these cattle would mean losing everything. What is the usual treatment? Hannah asked. You just try to keep it from spreading, Frank sighed. But once it gets going, there is not much you can do. That night, 3 more fell ill. Thomas worked until midnight, moving the sick animals, his face a mask of exhaustion. You need to rest, Hannah told him gently. I cannot rest while they are dying, he said, his voice cracking. This herd is 5 years of my life. If I lose them, I lose everything. She looked at this strong man broken by worry. Then tell me how I can help, she said. Do you know about cattle sickness? He asked, a sliver of hope in his eyes. I know about keeping animals breathing, she answered. My father used steam with herbs, pine and peppermint. It did not always work, but sometimes it did. They worked through that night and the next 2 days. Hannah showed Thomas and the men how to make a steam tent in the barn with cloth soaked in pine and herb infusions. It was a long shot, but it was better than doing nothing. By morning, a few of the first cows seemed to be breathing easier. It was a flicker of hope. Hannah and Thomas worked side by side, their hands brushing, a new kind of closeness forming in their shared exhaustion. On the third night, they watched a sick calf finally stand up and eat. Thomas spoke, his voice low and full of emotion. I thought it was all over. I thought 5 years of work was about to die right in front of me. He looked down at his rough hands. You saved them, Hannah. You saved everything. Don't say we, Thomas said, his voice low. I'd have let them die. You knew what to do. You worked when I was ready to quit. This was all you, Hannah. She wanted to call it luck, but that wasn't true. I just did what had to be done. His hand covered hers, warm and firm. That's what a real partner does. I married you for practical reasons, but I'm seeing I got more than I bargained for. Her breath hitched. Is that good or bad? He asked. Good, she whispered. Definitely good. A new understanding settled between them in the quiet barn. Thomas's fingers tightened on hers. I'm glad you're here, Hannah, not for the help, just I'm glad it's you. She laced their fingers together. I'm glad I'm here too. This is where I choose to be. By the end of the week, the cattle were on the mend. Thomas's relief was plain to see, and his eyes started finding Hannah wherever she was. As the days grew colder, they fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side. Frank, the old ranch hand, saw it all. Y'all are starting to look like a real married couple, he said one morning with a knowing grin. Not just business partners. Thomas just grumbled, but there was no bite in it. Your business is my business when you're grinning like a fool because your wife made your coffee right, Frank shot back, winking at Hannah. You're working miracles here, Mrs. Grayson. After Frank left, Thomas paused behind Hannah's chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. The simple touch felt different now, full of purpose. He's not wrong about the smiling, Thomas said quietly. I like who we are together. Hannah reached up and covered his hand with her own. So do I. That night, a blizzard hit hard and fast. Thomas was out checking the far pastures and hadn't come back. Hannah stared into the white chaos, her stomach twisting. He should have been back 2 hours ago. Frank appeared, covered in snow. Boss ain't back. I'm going after him. I'm coming with you, Hannah said, already pulling on her coat. He's my husband, and you need my help to track him in this. They found him a mile from the house. His horse had gone lame, and Thomas was half frozen trying to walk back. Hannah? He slurred, looking at her like a ghost. You stubborn fool, she said, pulling her own coat around him. Get on my horse, now. Together they got him onto her mare. She climbed up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist to hold him steady as the wind howled. Shouldn't have come, he muttered against her back. Too dangerous. More dangerous to let you freeze, she said, holding him tighter. I'm your partner. I come for you when you need me. They made it back to the house and got him stripped of his frozen clothes and wrapped in blankets by the fire. As he started to warm up, Thomas watched her with a serious intensity. You rode out into a blizzard for me. Of course I did, she said, chafing his cold hands. Hannah, he started, his voice rough. This arrangement we made, it's not enough anymore. Not for me. Her heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I mean, he said, taking a shaky breath, I can't call this just practical. It's real. Somewhere between you showing up on that train and riding into that storm to save my hide, I fell in love with my wife. The plain, honest words hung in the air. I thought we agreed to be honest if things changed, she finally whispered. I'm being honest, he said, his eyes searching hers. Has it changed for you too, or am I in this alone? She thought about the simple piece of this life, the pride in their hard work, and the warmth she felt when he looked at her. She had come here expecting nothing and agreed to this for survival. But somewhere along the way, this practical deal had become personal. The wrong bride had become the right woman. You are not alone, she whispered. I love you too. I think I have for weeks. Thomas pulled her into his arms. I want it all, Hannah, not just the practical parts. He kissed her hair, her cheek. Stay with me because you choose us. I already did, she said against his chest, feeling his strong heartbeat. I just did not know it yet. They held each other as the storm raged outside, the house finally feeling like a true home. When he was warm again, he tipped her chin up and gave her a real kiss, one full of promise. About those sleeping arrangements, Hannah murmured against his lips. Yes, Thomas smiled, a real warm smile that changed his whole face. I think it is time we discuss Chandiquamam. Best discussion we have had yet. That night, their partnership finally became a true marriage. Thomas moved his things into a room, and they began to learn about each other. Life on the ranch continued, but things were different. Frank noticed the small touches, the shared glances, the easy way they stood together. Winter arrived, harsh and unforgiving. But inside their home, there was a new warmth. They had started as strangers in a business deal, but through hard work and honesty, they found a love that was stronger than any storm. On their ranch, a hard day's work was the only kind they knew. Thomas and Hannah had built a quiet life together, one forged in the cold of winter in the warmth of their small home. He valued her spirit, and she loved his strength. They were happy, a simple truth earned from dawn until dusk. But the peace was shattered by a letter, brought in from the snow by Thomas. His face was a mask she could not read. "It is from my brother," he said, his voice tight. A brother he never spoke of, who had left for the big city years ago after a falling out. As Thomas read the note, Hannah saw the muscle in his jaw clench. An old hurt it seemed, had just ridden back into town. "Robert is coming here," Thomas stated, his voice flat. "He is bringing his wife and their two little boys. Seems his business back east went belly up, and they lost it all. They will be here in 2 weeks," he added, folding the letter with sharp, angry creases. "He says family has to help family." The words hung in the air, thick with irony. Robert had only remembered he had a brother when every other door had slammed shut in his face. Hannah looked at her husband and asked softly, "Do you want them to come?" Thomas stared at the letter for a long moment. "No, but he is still my brother. We have the spare room. We will make it work." Hannah knew this would test the simple happiness they had built, but she simply said, "Then we will make it work. Together." Later that evening, Thomas finally told her about Robert. He was the younger brother, the charmer, the one their father had always favored. Thomas was just the quiet older son who loved the land. Robert took his inheritance and chased dreams of wealth in the city, marrying a high society woman named Margaret. His letters, once full of big talk, had stopped completely 3 years ago. "Now he needs us," Thomas said, stirring his coffee. "And I know I should not hold a grudge, but it feels like he only called because he had nowhere else to turn." They spent the next 2 weeks turning their small home into a place that could hold 4 more souls. When the hired wagon finally pulled up, spitting Robert's family out into the gray afternoon, Thomas and Hannah were waiting on the porch. Robert stepped down, a wide, fake smile plastered on his face. "Thomas, my brother!" he boomed, giving him a stiff hug. His eyes scanned the ranch, sizing it all up. Then he turned to Hannah, his gaze dismissive. "You must be the mail-order bride," he said with a slick grin. "I am Robert." His wife, Margaret, looked tired and frail beneath an expensive but worn-out coat. "Welcome to our home," Hannah said, with a warmth she did not feel, refusing to be rattled. "Please come inside out of the cold." The two little boys, David and Samuel, looked scared and hungry. Inside, Margaret surveyed the simple wooden kitchen. "Well, this is certainly rustic," she said, and it was not a compliment. That first supper was a painful affair. Robert told grand stories of his failed business, blaming bad partners and worse luck. He never once took responsibility. Margaret barely touched her food, looking down her nose at the hearty ranch meal, while her two sons ate like they had not seen a full plate in weeks. The boys were the only ones who ate well. Afterward, Robert pulled his brother aside. Hannah showed a tight-lipped Margaret to the guest room. "How long will we be staying?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp. "As long as you need," Hannah replied gently. "Family is always welcome." Margaret's reply dripped with sarcasm. Hannah found Thomas in the barn, his shoulders tight with worry. "That bad?" she asked. "He wants money," Thomas said without looking at her. "Enough to get to San Francisco. He is my brother, Hannah. How can I say no?" "You can say no if it hurts us, if it risks everything we have built." Thomas finally met her gaze, his eyes full of conflict. "I have some savings. It is not much, but it would help him. But it would mean a much harder winter for us." Hannah stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "If you want to help him, I will support you. But be clear about what you are giving. Do not let guilt make you give more than we can afford." Thomas just repeated, "He is family." The next 2 weeks were a storm of restless energy from Robert and quiet scorn from Margaret. The easy comfort between Hannah and Thomas disappeared, replaced by the weight of judging eyes in their own home. The tension finally snapped 3 days before Christmas. Hannah was in town for supplies when she saw Margaret talking with Mrs. Winters. "Oh, speak of the devil," Mrs. Winters announced, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "The two Mrs. Graysons, one by law and the other, well, by arrangement." Hannah gripped her parcels tighter, but she refused to let them see her pain. Margaret's voice was dripping with false sympathy. She said it was a tough spot for Thomas, having to take a mail-order bride he'd never even seen. She claimed Hannah wasn't what he ordered, and the poor man was just making do. He needed a housekeeper, after all. Nearby, Hannah stood frozen, hearing every cruel word. It was one thing for strangers to gossip, but this was Thomas's own family, living under his roof. The casual dismissal of her worth felt like a punch to the gut. She could have walked away, but the same grit that got her through a blizzard wouldn't let this stand. She marched right over to them. "Ladies, I couldn't help but overhear." Hannah's voice was steady, cutting through their surprise. "You are right. Thomas married me sight unseen, and I am more practical than I am pretty. But you are wrong about one very important thing. He had a choice after 3 months of me proving myself, saving his herd, and riding into a blizzard for him. He chose me. Not because he was desperate, but because I am his partner." She looked straight at Margaret. "And you should remember that the poor man you pity is feeding your family and giving your husband a second chance. A little gratitude would suit you better than gossip." Hannah walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. That evening, Thomas found her in the barn. When she told him what happened, his jaw tightened. "I am sorry," he said. "You should never have to defend us." "She believes you settled for me," Hannah whispered. He gently turned her to face him. "Look at me. I love you because you are brave and strong. I love you because you welcomed my family when they had nowhere else to go. I love you. That is not settling. That is my choice, and I want them gone. Robert and Margaret, they need to leave. They're your family," she said softly. "You are my family now," he answered firmly. "My priority." Back at the house, they found Robert with Thomas's good whiskey, planning how to spend money he hadn't been given. Thomas's voice was ice. "You need to leave." Robert's smile vanished. "What are you talking about? Your wife has insulted mine, and you have done nothing but take from us for 2 weeks. I will give you money to get to San Francisco, but you are leaving tomorrow." The charm fell from Robert's face. "So, the mail-order bride has you trained already?" Thomas grabbed him by the collar. "That woman is worth 10 of you. She has earned her place here with grit and heart. You have earned nothing. Now pack your things." Later that night, Thomas held her close. "I am putting what matters first," he said. "You in this life we are building. I chose you, Hannah, because you are extraordinary, and I was smart enough to see it." She turned in his arms. "I chose you, too. You were never second best. You are exactly who I want." The next morning, Robert and Margaret left. Their son David gave Hannah a quick hug. "Mother says you are common, but I think you are kind." Hannah's heart ached. "Remember that," she whispered. "Kindness always matters more than what people say." She and Thomas watched them go, ready to face their future together. As the wagon disappeared down the snow-covered road, a quiet peace finally settled over the ranch. Frank, standing behind them, said what they were all thinking. Good riddance. Their Christmas was simple and real, just the two of them with the ranch hands. It was everything Hannah valued. She had arrived months ago as the wrong woman, a mistake in a mail-order bride arrangement. But now she was Thomas Grayson's wife, not by accident, but by choice. Their choice. In the warmth of the home he had built, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The wrong bride had become the right wife. Winter deepened, but the house felt lighter. Thomas and Hannah fell into a comfortable rhythm of cold mornings and long evenings by the fire. January brought a brutal cold that tested everyone. While Thomas and the hands fought to keep the cattle alive, Hannah kept the home fires burning. It was during one of those freezing nights, with the wind howling outside, that Hannah sat alone in the quiet kitchen and realized her monthly courses were late. A baby. The thought was both a joy and a terror. But then nothing about their life together had ever followed a normal path. She tried to keep her secret until she was sure, but Thomas knew her too well. He noticed the tiredness in her eyes and the way she pushed her food around her plate. A couple of weeks later, he found her leaning against the pantry wall, looking pale and unsteady. "Hannah, what is it?" he asked, his voice gentle with concern. Are you sick? She met his worried gaze and shook her head. Not sick, Thomas. Not in the way you are thinking. She watched as understanding slowly dawned on his face. She took his large hand and placed it on her stomach. I think so, she whispered. For a long moment he stood completely still, his eyes wide with a mix of wonder and fear. A baby, he said quietly. Our baby. He pulled her into a careful hug. I am terrified and I am thrilled, he admitted. But yes, Hannah, I am pleased. The news brought a rare, wide grin to old Frank's face, and the other ranch hands offered their own heartfelt congratulations. It seemed everyone agreed the ranch was ready for new life. The trip to see the doctor in town was unavoidable. Dr. Patterson, a kind man in his 60s, confirmed what they already knew. She was about 2 months along, healthy, and due in late summer. You will need to be careful, the doctor advised. Thomas, standing guard by the wall, nodded grimly. I will make sure of it. Hannah rolled her eyes with affection. I am pregnant, not made of glass. As they left the office, they ran right into Mrs. Winters, the town's most notorious gossip. Hannah simply lifted her chin and met the woman's gaze, ready for whatever came next. Mrs. Winters' eyes fixed on Hannah's middle. Well, well, she said loud enough for all to hear. 4 months married and already expecting. People will certainly talk about a hurried wedding. Thomas moved to stand right beside Hannah, a silent and solid wall of protection. Then those people would be spreading lies, he said, his voice dangerously low. But Hannah found her own strength. I love my husband and he loves me, she stated clearly. We are building our family and we don't need your blessing. Now, if you will excuse us. She took Thomas's arm and walked away with her head held high. That was very well done, Thomas murmured. He squeezed her hand tightly. You belong here more than most, he said. You've earned it. At the general store, they bought supplies for the coming months. The storekeeper's wife, Sarah, gave Hannah a knowing smile. Ranch women need to stick together, she offered, a simple kindness that meant the world. By March, her pregnancy was impossible to hide. Thomas became fiercely protective, refusing to let her lift anything. I am pregnant, not dying, she told him one morning, trying to carry a laundry basket. Women have been doing this forever. Not my woman, he answered, his jaw set. After some stubborn words, they made a deal. She would ask for help when she needed it, and he would promise not to treat her like she was made of glass. Spring arrived in a rush of green. While the men planned the summer's work, Hannah prepared for the baby. She felt the child move inside her, first flutters and then strong kicks. A whole person, Thomas would say in wonder, his hand on her belly. One quiet evening in May, a young man from the telegraph office rode up to the ranch. Telegram for you, Mr. Grayson, he said, handing over the paper. The message was from his brother, Robert. His business had failed, his wife had left with the boys, and now he wanted to come home, to the ranch. Hannah saw the conflict warring in Thomas's face. He's my brother, Thomas said, his voice strained. But I will not choose him over you. I won't put you through that again. Then what is there to decide, she asked gently. He stared at the crumpled paper. What if he has truly changed? Can I turn him away? She stood beside him, her hand on his arm. Thomas, you cannot save a man who will not save himself. Robert has to be willing to do the hard work. Changing. You have a wife, a baby on the way, and this ranch. They have to come first. So you should say no. Do what you believe is right. But if he comes back, there are conditions. He works like any other hand. He shows us respect. The very first time he slips up, he is gone for good. No more chances. Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with relief. When did you get so wise? She just smiled. I married you, did not I? Whatever you decide, I will support you. His message to Robert was clear. He could come back as a hired hand, not as family seeking a handout. He would work for his place. A week later, the reply came. Robert agreed he would arrive in late June. June came in hot and dry. Robert arrived on a blistering afternoon, looking like a shadow of the man who had left 6 months before. He was thin, his clothes were shabby, and his charm was gone, replaced by hardship. Thank you for this chance, he said quietly. I know I do not deserve it. You do not, Thomas agreed, but you are getting it. One chance, Robert. Do not waste it. Hannah watched from the porch, her hand on her swollen belly. He met her eyes and had the decency to look ashamed. "Mrs. Grayson, I owe you an apology for my behavior. You did not deserve any of it." "No, I did not," Hannah said. "This ranch runs on hard work and respect. Can you give us both?" "Yes, ma'am, I can." To everyone's surprise, he proved true to his word. He worked from before dawn until well after dusk, never complaining. "He is learning," the foreman, Frank, admitted one evening. "He makes mistakes, but he listens." "That is more than I expected." A quiet respect began to build between the two brothers, earned through shared sweat and labor. July brought a brutal heat in Hannah's final month of pregnancy. The baby came on a sweltering evening, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. "Thomas," she called out, her voice calm despite the pain. "It is time." The next hours were a blur of effort in Thomas's worried face. A neighbor from town, Sarah, guided Hannah through it all. Frank sent a rider for the doctor, but by the time he arrived, the baby was nearly there. As the sun set, a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a girl," the doctor announced, placing the infant on Hannah's chest. "Healthy lungs." Hannah looked at her daughter with dark hair and a furious little face, and felt her heart swell. "She is beautiful," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and she gripped his finger tight. "What should we name her?" Hannah asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Rose," he said finally, "after your sister, the one whose mistake brought you to me." Tears streamed down Hannah's face. "Rose Grayson. I love it." Little Rose, or Rosie, transformed the ranch. The rough cowboys turned gentle in her presence. Robert was surprisingly tender with his niece. He would hold her with a sadness in his eyes. "Do you hear from them?" Hannah asked him one evening on the porch. "David and Samuel." "Margaret sends letters sometimes," he said, his voice heavy. "The boys are well. I failed them." "You cannot unmake the past," Hannah said gently. "But you can make different choices now. Be a man they would be proud to know." Summer faded into fall. It was time for the big cattle drive to market, the culmination of 5 years of hard work. Thomas trusted Robert enough to go with them. It was a final test, and everyone knew it. The house felt empty and quiet after they left, and Hannah just held Rosie, counting the hours until they returned. Thomas, bone-tired but triumphant, swept Hannah right off her feet. "We did it," he grinned. "Got top dollar for that herd. We can build that addition you have been wanting." He told her Robert had earned his place to stay on for good. Hannah watched Robert by the wagon, a man changed by hard work. "That sits just fine with me," she said softly. That night, their whole makeshift family celebrated around the big kitchen table, a feast before them. Looking around, Hannah could hardly believe it. Just 8 months ago, she arrived as the wrong sister, a mistake. Now she was surrounded by people she loved, in a place that was truly home. Later, after baby Rosie was asleep, Hannah and Thomas stood together on the porch, watching the stars. His arms settled around her waist like it was made to be there. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice low. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "I love you, Hannah Grayson. I love the life we've made, even the mistakes that got us here." She smiled. "Especially the mistakes. They led me to you." He kissed her then, a slow and certain promise. The lonely rancher had found his partner, and the wrong sister had found her way home. They were partners, friends, and lovers, building something real in the vast Montana territory. It was not the story either of them had planned, but it was the one they chose together. And because it was theirs, it was perfect. This was not just an ending, but the beginning of everything that truly mattered.